speakers, Joëlle Uzarski and Francisco Paco Perez. Joëlle is currently serving as Public Diplomat in Residence at the Center on Public Diplomacy at the University of Southern California. Prior to this assignment, she served as Cultural Affairs Officer in Brasilia, the country Cultural Affairs Officer for all of Brazil. She has also served at U.S. embassies in Chile, India, Pakistan, and Thailand, and has directed State Department educational and cultural programs in 19 countries. And it was actually my privilege to serve with Joëlle my last year in India. Paco Perez is a local. He grew up in Belen, New Mexico, and he is currently the Public Affairs Officer for the U.S. Consulate General in Rio de Janeiro. So Joëlle is joining us from California. Paco is joining us from Rio. This is one of the advantages of having our programs on Zoom. Paco joined the State Department in 2008, following a fellowship with the Congressional Hispanic Caucus on Capitol Hill. He has served in Mexico, Dominican Republic, Panama, Benin, and the Department of State Operations Center, which is basically the nerve center for the State Department. He's a graduate of the University of Tampa and has a JD degree from the University of New Mexico School of Law. So thunderous applause greets our speakers as we welcome them, but you can't hear it because we're on webinar. Welcome, Joëlle and Paco.
Thank you so much. It's just really exciting to be here. Thank you for the invitation. Good morning, everyone. What Paco and I have decided to do is we're each going to give prepared remarks for about 15 minutes. And then after that 30-minute period of time, we'll go to Q&A. And my part is the sort of the introduction to Brazil. So let me go to my share screen. And do that and do this. Oops, not that. This. Okay, and I'll move this out of the way. Okay, so there we go. We're talking about Brazil. Our title is Dictatorship, Democracy, and Disease. I wanted to start with this map because I think we all love maps, and also it gives us a sense of where Brazil is and some of the primary, the major cities and the rivers and things like that. Brazil is roughly the same size as the continental United States, and it shares borders with all of the other countries in South America except Ecuador and Chile. It covers about 47% of the continent's land area. The population of Brazil is approximately 214 million. It's one of the most ethnically diverse and multicultural nations due to slavery, the significant indigenous population, European immigration, and Japanese population, particularly in the South. Brazil is divided into 26 states with also a federal district, and the current capital is Brasilia. Brasilia became the capital in 1960. It's a planned city. Well, I think it's beautiful. It's a hot topic because some Brazilians don't care for their capital. It's very futuristic and it's not chaotic, and some Brazilians feel that therefore it's not very Brazilian because it's so orderly and planned, but it's a beautiful city. The population is about 3 million, and then there's an additional million or so that live in the metropolitan area. The most populous city in Brazil is São Paulo, down there in the south. It has a population, if you include the entire metro area, it has a population of 22 million, big city. And São Paulo is Brazil's vibrant financial center. Brazil's Amazon basin includes a vast tropical rainforest, home to diverse wildlife and a variety of ecological systems, and extensive natural resources spanning numerous protected habitats. The Amazon has the greatest biological diversity in the world, and it's considered by many to belong to the world because it's like our planet's lungs. But the current Bolsonaro government rules under the premise that the Amazon rainforest is Brazil's. And when Bolsonaro came to power, the rate of deforestation of the Amazon rainforest increased sharply, threatening to reach a tipping point after which the forest will collapse, bringing about severe consequences for the planet's climate system and also a great loss of biodiversity. Brazil was inhabited by numerous tribal nations prior to the landing in 1500 of explorer Pedro Álvares Cabral, who claimed the area for the Portuguese Empire. Around the time of the Portuguese arrival, the territory of current-day Brazil had an estimated indigenous population of about 7 million people. After Christopher Columbus discovered the New World, Spain and Portugal raced to colonize these new lands. In an attempt to stymie its rival, Spain sought support from the Pope, who was at that time Alexander VI. He was Spanish born, and he created a line of demarcation to divide the nation's claims. The Spanish were authorized to explore and exploit everything west of the line of demarcation, and the Portuguese could only explore the lands to the east, which mostly was ocean. Brazil remained, just advance this, I'm in introductory details. Brazil remained a Portuguese colony until independence was achieved in 1822. So Brazil will have its 200th anniversary next year. Brazil remained maintained a monarchical system of government until the abolition of slavery in 1888 and the subsequent proclamation of a republic by the military in 1889. An authoritarian military junta came to power in 1964, and it ruled until 1985, when the military regime peacefully ceded power to civilian rulers. Because of its rich culture and history, Brazil ranks 13th in the world by number of UNESCO World Heritage Sites. Brazil hosted the 2014 FIFA World Cup and the 2016 Summer Olympic Games, which was the first time that the games were held in South America. From about 2013 to 2016, Brazil was plagued by a sagging economy, high unemployment, high inflation, and amazing corruption. It only emerged from recession in 2017. Former President Dilma Rousseff, who was elected in 2011, she was Brazil's first woman president. She was impeached and she was removed from office in 2016. Her vice president served out the remainder of her second term. In October of 2018, Jair Bolsonaro won the presidency with 55% of the vote, and he assumed office on January 1st of 2019. He's the current president. I just talked about that. The economy. Brazil is the 8th largest economy in the world. The GDP is composed primarily of the sectors of origin for the GDP are roughly three things: services, which is about 72% of the economy, industry, which is about 21% of the economy, and agriculture with the remaining 7%. Brazil ranks pretty low on the index for ease of doing business. It's ranked at 59. And it is hard to especially start a business in Brazil because of the bureaucracy, lots of bureaucracy. As you heard from the speaker last week, China is the primary export and import partner for Brazil. For the 2019 numbers, China was, in terms of export, had 28% of of Brazil's exports, and the United States had 13%. And then 2019 also numbers for import, China had 21% import partners. China was at 21%, the United States at 18%, and Germany and Argentina together were at 6%. Brazil's foreign policy is based on 4 guiding principles for relationships with other countries and multilateral organizations. Those 4 pillars are non-intervention, self-determination, international cooperation, and peaceful settlement of conflicts. Brazil has a long history of non-intervention in the affairs of other countries. An increasingly well-developed tool of Brazil's foreign policy is providing aid as a donor to other developing countries. Total aid is estimated to be around $1 billion per year. The scale of this aid places Brazil on par with China and India. Brazil was the only South American nation to send troops to fight alongside the Allies during World War II. Brazil has a large global network of diplomatic missions and maintains diplomatic relations with every United Nations member state, in addition to UN observer states of Palestine and the Holy See. As of 2019, Brazil's diplomatic network consisted of 194 overseas posts. Brazil is a founding member of the United Nations, and it participates in all of its specialized agencies. It has participated in 33 United Nations peacekeeping missions, and it contributed over 27,000 soldiers. Along with Japan, Brazil has been elected more times to the Security Council than any other United Nations member state. The census for 2020, Brazil does their censi every 10 years, like the United States. And the census for 2020 was postponed because of the pandemic. But in 2010, the ethnic groups identified at 48% white, 43% mulatto in this case defined as mixed white and black, 8% black, 1% Asian, and 0.4% indigenous. In terms of religion, Brazil is 65% Catholic and 22% Protestant. These are just some images of maybe some of the things that might come to mind when you think of Brazil or might not, but these are sort of, I would say, some iconic images. Brazil has an amazing soccer team. They've won more World Cups than any other country. The top center is the cathedral in Brasilia, which I think is just so beautiful. There's extraordinary, beautiful architecture in Brasilia. Brazil, a lot of it is coast, right? So the beaches are spectacular. The water is warm in most places except in the south. The two lower left ones are the Amazon, the second one being what's happening with the deforestation. And then the final one in the lower right is from the Carnival celebration in Rio. The Carnival is celebrated in different ways in different parts of Brazil, but in Rio, there's a parade of samba schools, and it's a pretty big event, and it's an exciting thing to attend. And so that's what that bottom right image is. I'd like to address briefly the, I did want to mention something more about the people. The demographic profile. And then we'll move on to the bilateral relationship. The demographic profile of the people, more than half of Brazil's population is considered middle class, but poverty and income inequality levels remain high. Those who are disproportionately affected are in the Northeast and the North and the Central West, and so are women and Black, mixed race, and indigenous populations. Disparities in opportunities foster social exclusion and contribute to Brazil's high crime rate, which you may have heard about, particularly the violent crime in the cities and the favelas or the slums. Brazil has traditionally been a net recipient of immigrants. It is the southeast part of Brazil is the primary destination for immigrants. After the importation of African slaves was outlawed in 1888, Brazil sought Europeans, particularly Portuguese, and Italians and Spaniards and Germans, and later Asians, particularly Japanese, to work in the agriculture industry, particularly in coffee cultivation. Brazil has a pretty urban population. 87% of the population lives in cities, and the literacy rate, last point I wanted to make about the people, is at about 93%, and the literacy rate that I'm referring to here is defined as age 15 and over can read and write. Okay, so moving on to the bilateral relationship. So the United States was the first country to recognize Brazilian independence in 1822. Though our countries have never been openly confrontational, these two largest democracies and economies in the Western Hemisphere have had a friendly, but not necessarily, not especially close relationship. Though the U.S. system of higher education is considered one of the best in the world, for example, Brazil modeled its higher education system after France's. In recent history, the bilateral relationship was strained over the June 2013 revelation of U.S. mass surveillance programs in Brazil and proof of the U.S. spying on President Dilma Rousseff. They refer to her, in our nomenclature, we would refer to her as President Rousseff, but Brazilians tend to refer to celebrities and political leaders and famous people by their first name. So they refer to her as President Dilma. President Dilma canceled her scheduled visit to the United States in September of 2013 in protest over the revelations that the US had been spying on her. However, these tensions receded somewhat in 2014 after it became clear that President Obama had not been involved in those surveillance programs. Dilma did have a state visit in 2015, and the relationship warmed a bit after that. In 2018, with the victory of Jair Bolsonaro, the two countries drew significantly closer. Bolsonaro and Trump were considered regional allies, and their administrations signed agreements in the areas of research, security, and defense. In spite of the sometimes strained official relationship, Brazil is one of the most pro-United States nations in the world. According to global opinion polls, 65 to 75% of Brazilian people usually view the US favorably. A status symbol among Brazilians who can afford it, for example, is a trip to Disney World. In March of 2019, the State Department awarded an Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation grant to restore and preserve the Valongo Wharf archaeological site in Rio de Janeiro. The wharf was built in 1811, and it was the site of landing and trading of enslaved Africans until 1831. The Cultural Preservation Grant will ensure the appropriate infrastructure for wharf public visits and educational outreach on the history and the contributions of African descendants to Brazil and beyond. The final slide and the final point that I'm going to address in my prepared remarks pertain to the dictatorship. In April of 1964, Brazil's leftist president was toppled in a coup that the United States government supported. A general became the leader of the government, and during the dictatorship, political parties were banned. There were 4 different military leaders who led during this 21-year period. During the dictatorship, supporters of Brazil's military regime, which include Jair Bolsonaro, we'll talk about that more in a moment, they credit the dictatorship with bringing security and stability and masterminding an economic miracle. That's in quotes. It's a bit strange, actually, because Brazil emerged from the military dictatorship with triple-figure inflation. It did advance several very large infrastructure projects, including the still unfinished Trans-Amazonian Highway and the 8-mile bridge across Rio's Guanabara Bay. But the dictatorship did not resolve the problems of illiteracy or malnutrition or high infant mortality that plagued the majority of the Brazilian people during that period. The military regime, while less notoriously violent than those in Argentina and Chile, it was responsible for killing or disappearing some 450 of its opponents and imprisoning thousands more. Among those jailed and tortured were Dilma Rousseff, who was then, at that time, a left-wing rebel. Sorry about my cat, she's joining us for a second. The dictatorship also was a period of severe censorship. Some of Brazil's most beloved musicians, like Gilberto Gil, Caetano Veloso, Chico Buarque. They were in exile in Europe, and they wrote songs about their enforced departures. So how did the military dictatorship end? I've already covered these bullets. It ended with, so political exiles began returning to Brazil in 1979 after an amnesty law was passed that began to pave the way for the return of democracy. Civilian rule returned in 1985 without bloodshed. A new constitution was introduced in 1988, and in 1989, Brazil held its first direct presidential election in nearly 3 decades. It's interesting to note that from the beginning of his presidency and even during the campaign, Bolsonaro has expressed nostalgia for the military dictatorship. This stance of his is widely condemned because the memory is a source of pain for many Brazilians. And though he sometimes attempts to soften his tone, Bolsonaro continues to insist that there was no coup, nor a policy of repression under the military governments that ruled Brazil from 1964 to 1985. So this ends my prepared remarks. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and Paco is going to start sharing his screen, and then we'll go from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Joelle, and thanks so much, Pat, Krista, Stephen, for hosting today. This is such an honor to be presenting at the Santa Fe World Affairs Forum, especially given that I'm from New Mexico. My parents live in Santa Fe on Zia Road, so even though it's virtual, this is, I think, as close as it gets to coming home in a way. But we're going to pick up right here with Lula and Bush. 2 presidents, very different ideologically, but this is when I joined the Foreign Service. I joined right at this time period, right after 9/11, and like so many other diplomats today, I think I found a call to service among the aftermath of 9/11. And what's interesting about Brazil is many Brazilians really felt the impact of 9/11, as everywhere in the world, right? I mean, the day after, I understand Le Monde, front page of Le Monde said, "We are all Americans." In Brazil, the Christ the Redeemer statue, they put billboards behind it, showing the skyline of New York, showing the Christ the Redeemer embracing New York after 9/11. So despite their ideological differences, and this is something I'm gonna show with the next few slides, Brazil and the United States have pretty much always had presidents that are opposite ideologically, conservatives and liberal leaders, up until Bolsonaro, Trump. But these two, you see them here in this photo, Presidents Bush and Lula, they got along, they saw eye to eye on a number of things. And one of the things that is still lasting to this day, still exists, is a joint action plan to eliminate racial and ethnic discrimination and promote equality. And what's amazing about that, it was across the board. Every agency from the CDC to the State Department to USAID had projects going on this joint action plan. And it's one thing that we're hoping to revive and bring back today. Moving now to the next period, the rumor has it when President Obama met President Lula, he said, "You are the man." And they had an instant connection. This was a brief period where they did have similar ideologies, in a sense, the two leaders of our two countries. Brazil played, I would say, a really large role internationally at this point. And 2011, as Joelle mentioned, right about this time is when Brazil was scheduled to host the World Cup, scheduled to host the Olympics. The Brazilian stock market started soaring, and oil was found off the coast of Rio de Janeiro. So a number of international companies came down here and opened up, like Shell and other major oil companies opened up shop, BP and others. So this was really a glory period for Brazil, and they played an outsized role as an emerging world leader, that's when Brazil also becomes a member of the UN Security Council. And the cost of goods in Rio was enormous at that point. It was comparable to London or Paris. And the real to dollar was at about 2 to 1. And just to give you a sense, today it's at about 5, almost 6 reais for $1. So it's really had a dramatic swing the other way. But President Obama, his first visit to South America was to Rio de Janeiro. And luckily at this point, I was stationed in Santo Domingo and I spoke Portuguese, and they said, hey, we need all hands on deck. Would you go down for the visit? And so the next thing you know, I'm in Rio de Janeiro and I was doing the visas so that other people could work on the POTUS visit. But when the weekend came along, they said, hey, we could use you in the motorcade translating for the Secret Service. Next thing you know, I'm in this motorcade, we're flying around town, and the Obama family visited the Christ the Redeemer statue, and this photo, Joëlle was reminding me, almost didn't happen. It was completely foggy. There was no visibility. They said you can't go up until the very last minute. They said it looks like there's going to be a break in the fog. It looks like we're going to be able to get you up there. And they were able to take the family up and see the Christ the Redeemer statue. They also went to City of God, which is one of the famous favelas here, and I went in on that portion of the trip, and it was exhilarating. I remember I get back to the hotel and I was exhausted, and they said, okay, you can go home. And I was leaving and they said, no, wait, Paco, we could use you one more. Do you mind taking one more little trip? I said, no, sure thing. Next thing you know, I'm in a van and the front of the van says FLOTUS. And I said, FLOTUS, POTUS, FLOTUS, what could that be? And the next thing you know, Michelle gets out and she and the girls go separately to the samba school. And I got to watch them learning samba with the winning samba school from that year's parade. And it was just such a magical experience for me. And I knew then that I had chosen the right career, and I knew I had to come back to Rio because it really is a magical, magical place. Moving to the next slide, this is Gilma, who Joëlle spoke a bit about, and really the NSA espionage issue overshadowed this relationship to an extent that people still talk about it today. You know, today there's a big discussion going on over 5G in Brazil, as in other places in the world, and that's one of the most common responses that I received when I talked to my contacts about it. They said, you know, you're gonna tap our phones. You know, we're not that concerned with China tapping our phones because didn't you already do that? And it was very tenuous for the two of them, to the point that I heard an interesting story from then Ambassador Liliana Yalde, who told me in a group, she said that she had come down to Brazil extremely nervous, knowing that she was entering this really tenuous situation. And she said that when she went to meet Dilma Rousseff for the first time, she went to the presidential palace and she sat down in the office, and Dilma was coming in, and she said she was so nervous and she knew she was going to get an earful about this. And she said that as soon as she walked in, she saw on her face that it was going to be a tough conversation. And Ambassador Ayalde began speaking in Portuguese, and she had grown up speaking Portuguese. Her Portuguese was amazing. And she said that as soon as she said, "Oi, tudo bem, muito prazer," President Rousseff's face shifted completely and totally welcomed her with open arms. Você fala português? And they hugged, and she said that she had this amazing personal relationship, and it was largely because of language. And that her advice to us junior officers at that time was focus on languages, because you don't know how far they're going to get you. You don't know how much they're going to open doors. And I thought that was a really good lesson learned. So that period was tough because you know, Brazil, that boom that I was talking about before, started to wear out its course. They found that a lot of the oil that was found off the coast of Brazil was not actually going to be lucrative for the Brazilian companies. So we saw a decrease in trade. The strong real meant less exports to the United States. The president, Dilma Rousseff, and others, they started tightening some of the economic policies at a time that created a pretty tough period for Brazil. And this slide shows some of the protests that took place. for Dilma's impeachment. And I think this is important to think about for a second, because in Brazil, there have been two recent impeachments. In 1992, the president was impeached, and then again in 2007, 6 or 7 under Dilma Rousseff. And those impeachments were accompanied by massive crowds, massive protests, people taking to the streets and demanding a change in government. And today, there are, I think, 141 calls for impeachment, separate procedures that have been brought in the Brazilian Congress for President Bolsonaro. But you don't see crowds like this on the streets in Rio. And of course, we're in a different time now under COVID, but every weekend you do see a pro-Bolsonaro protest here in Copacabana, going up and down the beach with people that are not wearing masks and are protesting against the lockdown restrictions. So it's interesting, the dynamic that exists here politically. And we'll talk about that now. So the next period that I'd like to discuss is the Bolsonaro-Trump relationship. And when Bolsonaro has, rumor has it, when Bolsonaro went to New York for the UN, and he saw Trump, he literally screamed out, "Trump, I love you." And they had a really tight relationship, a personal relationship. And that was something that people say have not existed in Brazil for a very long time amongst two leaders that saw the same ideologically. And to their credit, there was a lot of major advancements that people had been waiting on for years and years and working on were accomplished. And one, for instance, is an Alcântara air base. You might have seen there was recently a really good Washington Post article about this. And it had graphics and it showed where the Alcântara air base is, but why it's so strategic and important an air base is because it's closer to the equator. And so it makes it easier to get shuttles to outer space. And that's was an agreement that had been a long time in the making and finally came to fruition under these two presidents. At the same time, as Joëlle mentioned earlier, we did witness a dramatic increase in deforestation in the Amazon forest. And we can't talk, there's no way you can do a presentation about that this week without talking about it, because it is Earth Day coming up tomorrow. And in fact, President Biden and President Bolsonaro are scheduled to speak for the first time in a virtual setting tomorrow during this major Earth Day summit with world leaders from around the world. I just saw the headline that said that the Pope Francis will be part of it, as well as indigenous leaders from Brazil. So there are a lot of expectations from this summit, and we are looking forward to the policy outcomes that come out of it, and to work on those projects within the mission in Brazil. And that really, it seems to be the defining topic for these two presidents. However, and this is true in Rio, this is true in Sao Paulo, it's true in Brasilia, it's true all over Brazil. It's being overshadowed by COVID in a lot of ways. And I've prepared some slides here to talk about COVID. First, I'd like to show a couple slides here. Nobody has to memorize all of these names, but these are the current ministers of the Bolsonaro government. There are a couple of them that are bold. And the reason that those are in bold is because those ministers are former military officials. And it's something that has been noticed quite a bit in the international press. What percentage of the current ministers are military officials? And it's a pretty remarkable number. In fact, one of the headlines said Brazil has now a higher percentage of military ministers than Maduro in Venezuela. Turning to COVID, this here is Copacabana Beach in this first picture. Actually, in both of these pictures is Copacabana Beach, and those aren't actual graves. They're symbolically made by an organization to show just how many deaths are taking place in Brazil. And this made international headlines when they did this. But if you see other aerial shots of actual graves, it is rather terrifying to know what percentage of people are dying. And we're at a peak right now in terms of cases. And a lot of the cases, people believe the reason that we're seeing so many of these cases and so many deaths is because there's a variant that exists. And I'm sure many of you have read all about it, but there's a P1 variant that is a lot more contagious and potentially a lot more lethal that's going around in Brazil. And just to give an idea, in Rio de Janeiro, the Secretary of Health came out and said that 80% of all the cases, COVID cases that they're seeing in Rio de Janeiro are of the COVID P1 variant. So it is affecting people a lot more here. But just anecdotally, I work in a very small public affairs section of about 15 people, and we've had one staff member intubated for a long period of time, luckily survived and is doing okay now. We've had parents of our staff that have passed away. We've had children of our staff get very sick and have to go to the hospital. So it's definitely hitting close to home amongst our mission. And it's a danger in the sense that it can spread very easily to other parts of the world. South America is seeing more cases of the variant right now as well. And this is new COVID cases, and you can see a bit how the chart is progressing to now, and it's definitely on a steep increase. And then here's deaths, and that's even sharper. You can see the steep increases up to 4,000 deaths per day in this month of April. So that's really number one on everybody's mind. People are trying their best to abide by the restrictions. But for anybody that's been to Brazil, culturally, it's not a lockdown type of place. It's a place where people have many interactions with others per day, and to expect culturally a place like this to abide by these strict measures or to have strict social distancing or contact tracing is just kind of not realistic. So the best you can do is take care of yourself and to be a good example. But it looks like the real hope is on the vaccines, and the rate of people vaccinated with one dose as of today is 16% of the population. So that's a really positive. And when we saw the U.S. reach that level of vaccinations, we did see a steep decrease in the rate of spread. However, the big difference is in the US, people were getting the Pfizer vaccine, the Moderna vaccine. In Brazil, people are largely getting CoronaVac vaccine, which is produced by China, which even at its best has about 50% efficacy. And from what I've read on the first dose, it's really only 16% effective. So whereas the first dose of the Pfizer vaccine is going to get you 60, perhaps 70% protection, one dose of the CoronaVac is still very low. So I think this, I'm not the expert, but I think this is continue to rise a bit until we can get a little bit more people vaccinated here. And then hopefully it would start to drop. I think we're about out of time. This last slide is to talk just a bit about New Mexico. I grew up in Belen, and there's only about 10 Foreign Service officers from Belen in the Foreign Service, from New Mexico in general. I mean, one other from Belen that I know of, Ray Baca, who was Consul General in, I believe, in Bogota at one point. But the truth is, we all take care of each other. We all look out for each other. We have a spreadsheet. We all keep in touch with each other. And we've created a Facebook group. And I'd invite anybody who's not already on it, please join and share information and keep in touch that way, because I would not be in the Foreign Service today if it wasn't for a retired Foreign Service officer named Cortez Kibble, who retired in my hometown in Belen, New Mexico, and told me about it when I was 18. And I'm so grateful to him to this day. And I know that there are other students out there that could really benefit from someone like yourselves, giving them the tips and guidance to join the Foreign Service as well. So that's the end of the prepared presentation, but happy to stay on the line and do the questions and answer session now as well. Thank you.